Well, hello there, you beautiful, beautiful people. It's Saturday, and we're still doing videos. But you deserve it, because you're amazing. So let's get straight into the meat and potatoes. Now, I'm doing this video purely because I had so many people who emailed and reached out regarding the video over on Crime Circus, Drip Drop. And he was talking about the Brent Kopacka and Brent Kopacka's friend. Now, I had already looked into Bryan Kohberger's friend as well, regarding some of the posts that he had put up onto Facebook. I'd spoken to a few people in the comments because there was some things that I found quite interesting with regards to this guy. One of the biggest things that I found with that situation was the fact that he had said that there was clearly a collection of machetes. So it would appear that Brent Kopacka did indeed he was interested in knives and machetes, let's just put it that way. But at the end of the day, he was indeed ex-military, and it's not uncommon for ex-military servers to be interested in that sort of thing and collect that sort of thing. So look, what I'm going to say is this. You're kind of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea with this connection, because even though in Drip Drop's video he raises some real interesting points, I think he went really hard in some areas that kind of, I suppose, do what I do sometimes, and that is you can overdwell on a specific narrative and it can then lose its potency, if you like. And what do I mean by that, I hear you say? Let's put it this way. I believe that unless Bryan Kohberger can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he did this crime, then you have to assume that he didn't and that somebody else did. That's just a given, isn't it? If Bryan Kohberger is innocent, then somebody else isn't. And that's the important thing that people must understand. That Bryan Kohberger, as it stands at the moment, has not been convicted of this crime. And we certainly have not seen enough evidence brought to kind of public awareness that would leave you in a position where you could say, I can see that Bryan Kohberger did this crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Because there is doubt. There are things that do raise questions. And when I say about what raises questions, the fact that, look, the car, for instance, despite what anybody says, you don't know from any of the footage that we have seen that that is 100% Bryan Kohberger's car. We just don't know that. Yes, there's pictures of cars that kind of look like an Elantra, but let's not forget that there are so many Elantras around this area. I believe that Drip Drop shows in his video that there's like 22,000 registered Hyundai Elantras in this area, and you know, so it's not uncommon for an Elantra to be there, and Bryan Kohberger is one of a big pool of cars. And let's not forget, law enforcement had stated at a time when it would appear that they would have still had Bryan Kohberger on the radar, that they were still looking for a car that didn't match his car. But that's by and by. So what else is there? The fact that with regards to Bryan Kohberger himself and many of the things that have been utilised to make people kind of consider his guilt, if you like, the narcissism, the statements that he hated women, the fact that he'd been, I say fact, that he'd been sacked from his job, all of these things. These are just things that have been posted through different media outlets, whether it be Dateline, whether it be News Nation, whether it be mainstream media. That is complete and utter speculation, and nothing has been proven. And there lies the groundings for many, many people's thought process on him being guilty. So a lot of that is pure speculation. We have a contradicting piece of information regarding there being no connection between Bryan Kohberger and the victims, which would lead you to believe that any statement that you read where somebody is saying that Bryan Kohberger followed these victims on social media, or he was sliding into their DMs and things like that, it just simply isn't true if you go by the court documentation. And if you're one of these people who believe mainstream media or YouTube over court documents, then I can't help you beyond that. So we've got a car that's unconfirmed. We've got no seeming connection between them. We've got a scenario that would, again, through the court documentation, state that there was no DNA found in Bryan's car and his apartment on Bryan himself. So no DNA link either, and that's a massive one. And look, I'm not ignoring the elephant in the room here. The fact that there is a knife sheath found at the scene of the crime with Bryan Kohberger's DNA. I'm not. What I'm saying is that is seemingly the ace in the hole. And we talked about it yesterday, about some things, if it looks too good to be true, then in many, many walks of life it is. Point I'm trying to make though, guys, is you as American citizens have a constitutional right to be seen as innocent until proven guilty. And if you have to consider that Bryan Kohberger could be innocent, then who is not innocent? And that opens the door to alternatives. And look, like Bryan Kohberger should be considered innocent till proven guilty, same as these other people. You know, they may not have anything to do with this crime whatsoever. Now, I do feel that Drip Drop, as I was starting to say, with regards to the horror films and, you know, being interested in horrors, being, you know, I think that's really stony ground to walk over, because we've seen this before, haven't we, where it's like Eminem, when Eminem's rap music was about earlier, you know, his earlier stuff, and people were attributing that to when, you know, young kids were doing heinous stuff, and, you know, blame the music. You know, that's what people say. And we went round this mentality of, if someone does a bad thing, then blame a film or blame music. But at the end of the day, it's an individual who is bad, isn't it? And, you know, I think that, yeah, is it more likely that a serial killer or someone who's going to commit a crime like this might have an interest in the macabre? Highly likely, but would somebody make it so public about their kind of what they're interested in? Or if they were at a level where they were contemplating wanting to do something, would they then want to make their love of these things, the love of the macabre, and showing all these you know, these things to do with their films, would they be so public about it? That's the bit that I struggle with. You know what? You know, we've spoken about, I think it was like in the Summer Wells case, where people have sort of the life with which they allow people to see, then they have their behind closed door persona, and then they have that much more deep, darker persona as well. There's sort of 3 levels to a person. And my mind process doesn't allow me to consider that if someone is this sick that they would do this crime, that they would be so open and bold about displaying, this is the sick stuff that I'm into. You know, and for me, what do I think about the camera situation is the big one. Drip Drop raises some really good points regarding, if you look at the PCA and when it stipulates when Bryan Kohberger's car was seen on the cameras as he apparently made his way to Moscow, it does raise the question as to why his car wasn't seen earlier, why it wasn't seen on other cameras, and the cameras that it did seem to pick him up on seemed to have him going in the opposite direction, which is something that we've spoken about before. Whenever there is a car that you kind of see in the public released images, it always seems to be going in the wrong direction, which would then further support some of the theories that we have considered, and that is, if Bryan had an involvement in this, did he have somebody with him? So did he go and pick someone up? Did he make his way to Moscow, Idaho with a second or even a third person? Again, which would support, when Bryan Kohberger was arrested, for him to turn around and say, was anyone else arrested? Now, that statement, we don't know whether that was true or not. We do not know whether that statement was indeed true. And I've always said this, that if Bryan Kohberger truly said that, then I believe that that single statement proves that he had involvement. Proves that he had involvement, and potentially proves that he had involvement with somebody else doing this crime. But whether he said it or not, that is something that is going to elude us probably forever. Now, with regard to Brent Kopacka, do I believe that Brent Kopacka could be involved in this crime? Now, I do not believe that you can, with regards to PTSD, is to turn around and say that PTSD could be triggered by watching horror movies. I think that is a far reach. I think that that is a borderline ridiculous thing to say or consider. PTSD doesn't stop somebody from being an adult and understanding that what you're watching in a film is not real. They don't lose the perception of what is real and what is not. You know, PTSD is something that is triggered by something that will remind you and take you back to a situation, but it has to almost trick the mind into believing that you're there. So it might be a sudden bang or a gunshot, you know, that kind of thing, or stress over a, you know, just a relax. It's almost in some situations like a stress trigger event. And, you know, I'm not going to get into that. But what I'm going to say is that if Bryan Kohberger didn't do this crime, then for me, the next most likely person is Brent Kopacka. And there are some things around Brent Kopacka, like the interest in the machetes, etc., that leads me to believe that he's somebody who would be looked into in the event that he was still alive. You know, if he was still alive, if he was still around, then if they didn't have a suspect, if that knife sheath hadn't have been left or hadn't have been placed, and they didn't have Bryan Kohberger in their hair sights, then would we have a scenario where Brent Kopacka is being looked into? Would there be a knife sheath with Brent Kopacka's fingerprint on it? Who knows? Let me know down below what you think. If you saw Drip Drop's video, what did you see? And what do you think to it all? Now, with regards to this case in general, it's a mystery, so many questions. And do I think that they have the right guy? I think that Bryan Kohberger somewhere along the line has some involvement in 1122 King Road. And I only think that because I find that it's a stretch to consider that law enforcement would have planted the knife sheath at this stage. I'm not saying it's beyond the realms of possibility, but I'm more inclined to believe that Bryan Kohberger was involved in this crime alongside somebody else. And the only reason I think that is because of the statement as to whether he said, was anyone else arrested? And the crime itself, I don't believe that one person could have done it all by themselves. And I think that it would have taken more time, and someone more skilled than Bryan Kohberger to do the actual crime itself. But let me know down below. It's Saturday. Go and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll perhaps catch you all tomorrow. Peace.